Hi, everybody. How is everybody doing tonight? Welcome to our Facebook Live on attention, settle, and recall. I am Joanne Swickey with For Better, For Worse.
And I'm Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
Right, I'm trying to deal with some technical difficulties on the screen, so that's why you see me looking like deer in the headlights. So we're missing Nancy this weekend. She hosted a big seminar, and so she's not going to be able to join us tonight. So I know this was titled, right, the three kind of biggest things you should teach your dog. And they may not seem like much, but I know for myself, you guys hear me talk about the Doberman that Lisa won't take. Right? Nobody wants him. I love him, but you hear me talk about him, but these are some of the things that I truly had to work really, really hard on just to get life to happen. And so they were super important to me. And when we have really nice, easy dogs that just kind of hang with us, don't cause any problems, I think we forget how important these can be to our relationship. So I know Lisa has a lot of videos to share. So Lisa, would you like to share anything about these topics? I know they're near and dear to you as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, like, first of all, I think what's important is, like, when you first get into a new environment with your dog, you have to let them, like, kind of check out what's happening around them. We do the same thing, right? When we go to a desk job, for example, and I had a desk job for many years prior to jumping into this amazing thing of life that I'm in. But anyway, what happened is like when I come in, I had my coffee, I'd get myself situated before I'd start my day. And I think what's crazy is that we expect that of dogs immediately, but we ourselves require that before we actually started to focus on a task. So getting the dogs in a situation to kind of like see what's happening around them, and then seeing if they can choose us over the environment. So the attention part, right? After that, once we have attention, your dog's able to like stay a little more connected on a consistent basis. Then you can start asking for more behavior, whatever that behavior is. And for me, it's like, can you pay attention to me? Can you, split attention between what's happening over there versus, what's happening with you and I. Today I did a class called Out on the Town, and there was a little shepherd who was like, she was looking between like two boxes to see the golden retriever. She was like, what is he doing over there? And I'm like, she's like, oh, and I'm like, let her have a minute to figure that out. And then once she's attentive, you can leverage more behavior. And then, of course the recall is super important, right? So that's a life-saving skill, period. And we all are that. To me, I mean, I've had littles who are like, catch me if you can. And that is so annoying. And for me, I want that to be like something, if I call you, come immediately. So yeah, but we have some video about some of these things. And I think that, to me, the subtle part, the paying attention part, all that stuff is super critical to have that relationship between you and your dog in the presence of various distractions. So.
Mm-hmm. And before we really get into videos, I think it's so funny because, you hear Lisa and I, and even Nancy too, right, talk about how we kind of grew up with the Susie and Clothier and how she was just so different than any of the other training stuff that was out there at the time. I know Lisa and I have talked, right? It seems like all of the big names are just now catching up and doing the things that we were doing, 10, 15 years ago, which is, it's really interesting. But when we talk attention, I find people expect like this military grade, right? Mm-hmm. I am watching you. I'm not paying any attention to anything that's going on over here. It's just you. I'm shutting out the rest of the world. And that's not what we're talking about. It's not realistic to like, maybe if I'm dealing with something real specific where I'm like, oh my God, like, let's just focus on me really quick, right? But that's different. That's like to kind of get me through a situation. which even still, there's better skills to teach than that. But right, this is more so like, hey, friend, we're going to have a conversation. Can you be a part of this with me? And it's your choice. And sometimes they're like, can you give me 1 second? I just got to finish typing this email that I'm doing and I will be right with you. And our dogs do that too, right? So it's not this militant, give me your attention. It's tapping your friend on the shoulder and saying, hey, can you work with me? Can we start having a conversation that, you and I are both in together? And you are a part of that as well, right? We're asking the dog for something, but when you put them on hold as well, like, oh, I got to refill my treat bag and I got to do this. And right, it's absolutely okay for them to be like, oh, whew, I want to see what that golden retriever is doing over there. Just like she said, right? So I think I wanted to preface the attention piece with that, right? It's more a conversation and less of a command.
Right. And I think too, like you say, it's a choice, right? You're asking, can you do this? And then once the dog is able to do it, then you can go ahead and move forward with having the conversation. And the conversation, like, I mean, how many times have we gone into a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden they get right to the point? And the point is I'm talking about this situation, and you're like, hey, wait, what were we talking about? I mean, how many times have we had that conversation where all of a sudden we weren't prepared for the subject at hand, or they switch subjects and they think we know what we're talking about and we don't, right? So, and I think a lot of times it's like, and I've heard people like this, the difference between the auto check-in or the unprompted, unsolicited eye contact, it's a choice. And then you use stimulus gradient to identify or help the dog make the proper choice. So I don't give them all the leash to be able to make that decision. What I do is I bring them in a bit and like, okay, this is what you get. Oh, that's a little too close. How about if I step back further? Can we do that? So, and I think that's very different, because I find a lot of times when I'm working with people, they're cueing it. But the problem is with cueing it, it becomes very, it's a cue. It's not, I'm asking you to pay attention to me, not, are you offering it to me? Are you ready to have a conversation? Because honestly, if somebody doesn't want to have a conversation with me, I'm cool with that. That's cool. I'll go on about my business and we're good. But when I'm working with a dog, it's important to me they're able to split that. So, and I think that's the biggest difference. Like, the only time I really ask for any kind of attention is if we're walking into, like I use as an obedience ring or a rally ring, watch me or what have you. And, even then, if I have to prompt it, there's some questions I have about, are we actually ready for that conversation or that level of difficulty in terms of sustained attention? But this is different. This is more of a casual conversation, right? So unprompted, unsolicited eye contact is something that is offered. It is not cued. It becomes, and I compare it to like a please and thank you for kids. Like, we ask them for it and then we help them along the way. And then finally they start offering it and we're like, awesome, they're doing it on their own. So it becomes innate. It becomes more of a something that who they are. And I think that is something that's missing. Like, I'm not a dictator. I mean, like, if somebody dictated to me, I'm like, peace out, I'm going. Like, it's just not okay for me. So I think that for me, it's more about choice for my dogs to say, hey, you're pretty cool. What are we talking about? That's a pretty interesting subject. Let's continue on. So.
Yep. And I think too, it's all contextual. So you may have a dog that's great at it and all of a sudden something's going awry, right? So think about it. If Lisa and I, we're face to face, right now instead of screen to screen, and we're having a nice conversation, and I said, oh my God, there is this hugest spider coming down from your ceiling. Oh my God, it's gross. And I'm like, don't look, wait, don't look, because you're looking at me. And she's like, what? Like, I have to look. And you're like, don't do it. You're paying attention to me. Right. So to ask her to not be able to check on her own personal safety and be able to know, right, she's not going to get bit by the tarantula that's coming down, that's fair too. Right. So, and I think that goes back to that, like, it's a choice. It's not a dictatorship. I'm not going to correct you if you need to look at something else. It's information for me to say, is it constant? Is it a one-time thing? Do we need to move away? Right? Like, what are you looking at? Because if she turned around and I didn't know, I might turn around too and be like, oh my gosh, let's go over on the other side of the room. Right? So you get a lot more information from your dog when you're listening for it.
100%. So I think, and then we can talk a little bit about, or if we want to go into some video and stuff, I think I had some video. And Joanne, if you want to start, it's totally up to you if you feel like you have to add something else, but we can look at some of the video. So, and talk about some of the eye contact and focus. I think I did one in YouTube for Pan when I first got her back in 2020, working on attention and focus. And mind you, like, there's certain breeds and certain dogs and temperaments that are like, I'm totally with you. What are we doing? Who cares about anything besides them? And knowing that my dog is willing to do that, but then also knowing in her case that she was a little sensitive, like she would do it. But then if something startled her, it startled her. And then it stopped her for a minute from being able to interact with me. So, and I share this like with some of my students because I'm like, you know, it should look something like this, right? And I'll send that to you, but there are other pieces of it because once I have attention and focus, I can leverage more behavior with my pup, but not until then, right? I can't ask you to talk to me if you're like, what's that dog doing over there? And I keep begging you. What ends up happening is we end up like teaching it or almost allowing them to kind of like not engage us, right? So I'm going to put this on to you. Okay. And we can look at that. So sorry I didn't send this sooner.
That is all right.
But there's, oops. And that's my very first thing that I work on with any dog, which is very typical of, I know the three of us. It's like, can you split attention? And I think the other component that we have to understand is that does it have something to do with the fact that are you feeling safe or not? Because there are different points of it, right? So dogs we've worked with, they have been concerned about the environment or what's that sound or what have you. Well, they can't split attention if they're concerned about their safety, right? So those are some things that people need to consider when you're taking your dog into a different location or an opportunity to split attention. And again, less is more, as always. Like, don't go into a dog's, like a pet training store, a pet store, and expect your dog to split attention in the face of all this distraction, people, dogs, etc. Maybe step outside several feet away from the front door and say, can you split attention here? So, did you get that by chance yet? Or
did you email it to me? Oh, there it is. Okay, sure. There we go. Give me 1 second. I will.
And then
get the ad to stop.
Oh,
see, we're splitting attention. See how weird it is for all of you guys?
It is. Like multitasking, right? We're asking dogs to multitask. We're not the best at it either.
Like, give me 1 second. I'll be right with you. Hold on. All right. Let me share this.
So, perfect.
All right. Ready? We're just going to play this?
Yep. And then just mute. Yeah, perfect. So this was a new pup to me. I had treats in my pocket. I think also, too, there's a question of when to place reinforcement and when to have it available and when not to. And I had it in pockets. And if you pay attention, like she's like, oh, you have a cookie in a pocket. Those are some things, too, because they are kind of precursor behaviors to, I'm going to get a cookie. I should pay attention. Right. And so like when I analyze everything I do, I'm like, all right, could I have made that better somehow? Could I have been a little clearer for my pup then? And right now she's constantly paying attention to me. I mean, she does a pretty good job with that. And I also switch hands. And the other thing I think is interesting is that I want them to pay attention when I'm paying attention. It's not a staring contest, right? It's not like I see you, you see me. And nothing, I mean, it shouldn't be nothing else matters. It should be like, that's interesting, but we're together. So I generally, and I know you do this as well, we start with on leash to get the dog to offer that attention. And then we might start offering motion, right? I move a little. Can you still do it? I don't care about the sit. I think a lot of times, I don't know if you, Joanne, find that where people will want them to look at you and then sit. And you're like, that's not what this is about, right?
Yes. And then so it's important because as Lisa talks about the hand in the pocket, the cookie is a precursor, right? That sit can actually be a command.
Right. Oh, got a little sticky there. And then once my dog's attentive, then I can start moving. So right now I'm kind of moving a little bit of loose leash walking and so forth. But that is one piece of it. And I am super soft on my leash handling to like not like choke her out, to be like, I'm your only choice, right? So there's so much around the environment that she can look at, but she chooses to offer that attention.
Well, and not even choke her out, right? It's like you're not even giving really leash pressure to get her attention. You're just waiting for her, right? So I think that's important. It's not hey, it's been 20 seconds, leash, right? It's not even that. She will give it when she's ready, and I will wait for it.
And I think it's waiting, right? So I ended up putting a ball down. And so I started to add because I liked what I was seeing. And then I moved the ball. I kicked the ball there a bit. And she's like, I like the ball, but what are we doing? Right? That's interesting. There's an opportunity right there, was an opportunity for a choice. She was like, that's interesting, but what are we doing? Right?
So I think I'm going to go back here because I want you guys to really see this. Okay. So as she rolls that ball, right, she gets very distracted. And she kind of looks, she'll look off into the distance here like, oh, hey, what was that? Oh, there goes the ball, right? Huh, yes. Good. And so that's the moment. This is the first intro to real life, right? So like, hey, there's something super interesting, like your ball, like your toy, like your whatever. And the dog's like, really? And then they go, well, can I have that? And then like, as soon as they check back in with you, boom, that's the moment that you're like, nice choice.
Absolutely. So now I'm adding a bit of distraction. And this is one way to add the distraction, real life distraction in the home, because the home is very not as exciting and novel, right? And right there, I was like, oh my God, that was fantastic. You totally chose me over the food bowl with something in it. And she's like, all right, I can do that. So then a little leash tension, but she's like, oh yeah, that's right. We're together. And I think we move real quickly on this and we expect a lot. That was an opportunity right there. She was thinking about it. You saw the smoke coming from her floppy ears and she was like, Mom.
Yeah. And when Leisha says leash tension, when Lisa says leash tension, okay, I want you to know she's not putting, right, a lot of the back pressure. The dog is starting it. She may back up, but again, it's a constant. It's never a pop. Okay. It's just I'm not letting you get to that. When you choose the right thing, boom, the leash pressure goes away and like, yay, nice choice.
Good. Now, and to be fair, our herding breeds, there are certain breeds that are very visual. So my motion can help that attention, right? And that's something that we need to recognize, because honestly, my herding breeds are very visual. So I can help a lot with visual stuff, right? Whereas if you have a dog who's like more of a guardian breed orienting out, I'm thinking like flock guardian, that's much more challenging, I think. They're a little more slower to react. And those are things that you can utilize as motion. But I find certain breeds or certain groups, look at her, she's like, there it is behind me. What's the deal? But I think certain breeds are more as a group less prone to offer attention quicker, if that makes sense, based upon motion and like knowing who your dog is, like toy breeds, super fast in reacting because they're designed to be a little more reactive to excitement or motion because, oh my God, alert barking, for example, everyone's favorite. Our guardian breeds are more attentive to visual as well. Our hound hounds or visual dogs, such as sight hounds, for example, are more attentive to visual as well.
Yep. And
So
I think too, it's important to talk about when we first start this, right? How long is this? 7 minutes. I don't
yeah,
know that I would work
that's
a new
long.
dog. Yeah. So Shalisa's doing this long for the purpose of showing the video. But yeah, I don't know that I would do that this long with a brand new dog.
No, but also I had this dog for a bit, and I've been reinforcing eye contact in a benign environment. This is kind of further along with more challenges, and so you have to first get the behavior with benign stuff, and then once a dog's offering it is obnoxious about it, then you're like, all right, let's add a distraction. But I also think what's critical and what's challenging for most people is when to move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
How quickly to proceed. And honestly, it totally depends on the individual dog. Like everything, it is relative to the individual dog. Like I was able to move this because this particular dog was more sensitive to motion, a little concerned about people, et cetera, et cetera. And so to her, I could have pushed her a little bit more. But would I do that with the average dog? Absolutely not. I would not. I mean, it totally depends. I am more, I will move a little quicker with my own dogs because guess what? If I mess them up, it's on me, you know? But if it's somebody else's dog, I am not about to put them in that position. I'm like, let's lay a little longer foundation. I'd rather err on the side of caution.
Yeah. And I think if you're like, again, every dog is unique. There's no magical number, right? But like 10 to 15 seconds of them disengaging and re-engaging. If there's anything longer than that, I am not going to move forward, right? It's too hard for the dog to split their attention. They're basically putting you on hold to be like, I need to process that. And I mean, I think we've all worked with dogs where it's like 2 and 3 minutes, right? And that's the beginning stages. And so I know in that moment, like I have to change something. First of all, if it's brand new, the dog doesn't understand the exercise. Secondary, there's too many distractions in the environment, right? So I might go to, a bedroom, close the door where there's nothing. There's no TV. There's nothing going on. It's quiet outside, and just minimize as much as I can so I can get some really good reps in, kind of like Lisa was doing the very beginning before she added distractions.
Yeah. And I think that we're so quick to push, quicker than the dog is ready for. And those are things that, I mean, if you do it, if you recognize you're doing it and then you're like, whoopsie, too much, and you step back, that's one thing. But I think most people think, well, you should know this by now. Because honestly, every single time I go into a new environment, that's the very first thing that I'm concerned about. Can you split attention in this environment? Do I exist? Do I matter? And if I don't, we're not proceeding forward, period. So like I'll get him out of the car and then we start there, period. And I think that's like, you as a student, you have to be prepared to come a little bit early to set your dog up for that success because it sets a precedent, right? And a pattern of behavior for your dog. They're like, oh, we do this every time. Yes, in this environment, in this environment. And so then they have to understand that it across the board, it happens here, here, and here, not just at home, right? So, and if I have dogs who are hyper vigilant to sound, sight, etc., you're going to start in the house, then you'll start to move to your backyard, your front yard, and you'll gradually increase the challenge. So,
yep. And I'm going to give you a little secret, even though it doesn't work for me. But, for those of you who struggle with leash training, and I know I do with a particular dog, right? This is a really, really great thing to teach prior to taking your leash training on the road. Okay. So it, again, like Lisa said, it sets that precedent for the dog. Like, hey, we are together on this whole thing. And you get a little bit less of like the squirrel traffic, right? And sometimes you just have to kind of sit and be quiet and wait for those attention before you're going to proceed on your walk. Right. And maybe your walk is your driveway or your front sidewalk, as opposed to going around the park or the entire block. But this is a really helpful skill to incorporate into all of your leash training, because if the dog's attentive enough to give you its eyes, right, to give you its attention, then it's hopefully not going to be dragging you. Right. So, and I just think it's funny because I'm always talking about BAM, right? But he knows this very well, but it's the distraction piece. Like he struggles to process in most environments, right? To stay focused on me. It's just hard. And we work on it all the time. He's 4 and we still work on it.
But don't you find the boys mature a little slower than the girls?
He's 4.
Yeah, well, yeah, I get it. But I mean,
Well,
I totally understand, but I do think like there's something to be said for dogs. Like, I like certain dogs for certain things, right? So, for example, my cattle dog, she was amazing, and then all of a sudden it like fall to crap. Like the behaviors, she couldn't do it. It was hard for her. She turned into a butthole, and I'm like, I love you, but wow, really, what is going on, right? And so then I had to step back and like, okay, we need to revisit basics. And I think a lot of times we don't do that. It's like, you should know this, but when you're trying to relay behavior or relay certain things, you have to be willing to flex. Like you can't be inflexible. Like, and the more inflexible you are, the less successful and the more frustrated you are in life, right? You have to learn to like roll with the punches, so to speak. And, and for her, like, I love her, but there are times that I'm like, wow, you are just something else right now. And so we have to go back to basics. And I think that's really hard for a lot of us to do.
And I'm just going to throw this out there, right? Because there are moments, right? We are all positive trainers and we all do our best. And there are moments where I'm like, oh my God, I just want to pop that leash, right? I just want to just like, what is wrong with you? But, right. When if you succumb to those moments, right, it's just damaging the relationship.
Yes.
Damaging the trust. It's damage. Because if the dog's really trying and they're struggling and there's something that you're not doing to help them, right, and all we do is throw out a correction or get angry with them, they're gonna not try, right? And if that is their best, if they're trying the absolute hardest, and again we get frustrated with that, what's the point? Why would I try any harder? Like I'm barely holding it together here, sister. What do you expect from me?
Right.
So just remember that. Keep that in your brain if it's a really tough day of training.
And I think too, like when I'm like, okay, I'm not enjoying this. Like I'll step back and be like, I think we need to take a break from, we need to miss each other a little bit. Like absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? So you separate, you're going to move on. We'll come back to this and see how things work. And then the next thing would be like, once you do have that attention, like what's the next step? To me, it's like, can you relax? Can you be functional? Can you not be on such high alert or super like aware or super willing to like work and engage in this and that? Can you just be? Because I think as I get older, I'm like, how much I value just being quiet, hanging, like, and we don't get enough of that. And like, life is very quick and fast. And I think we also are like, we're all working towards a goal. And sometimes you lose sight of the things that are most important. And sometimes, like, I remember my mom saying to me, silence is golden, right? And it's true because I think it settles the mind. And then once the mind is settled, then you can really engage the dog and say, okay, can we do this? Are you okay with this? So like, to me, settle would be the next piece of it. Once your dog's actually functional and saying, splitting attention, their motions and their body language is smooth and really like fluid, right? Then I can proceed forward. And I think so I did a class today, and the first class I did, there was one dog that was super hyper vigilant, hyper aware, and he's like, oh my gosh, there's dogs. And he was just in a Vishla, of course, I know it's shocking, on and staring and watching the other dogs and stuff like this. The other dog was really worried, like, why is he looking at me? That's kind of crazy. And so that dog was a little concerned. So we had some social dynamics going on. So we increased space. And then finally both dogs relaxed. And you have to look for that fine motor skills, fine body language to help you determine where to go to next. Because if I ask them to sit or down or stay at that point, they're not in any frame of mind, right, to engage with me because of the fact that they're more concerned about what's happening around them. So, and I think a lot of times we're like, you need to ignore that. Well, if somebody's like, you need to ignore that, I'm like, well, the car's going to come and hit me. Well, I need to be concerned about it. I'm going to be like, nope, forget you. I'll face push you out of the way. I'm doing this first. Right. So I think a lot of times someone's having fun in the background.
No having fun during Facebook Live. Sorry.
Always. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's super important to have that understanding and that respect for the individual, right? Like move at their pace. That's what's important. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are some dogs who, when we talk about the settle, right? You'll hear us talk about relaxation protocol, settle, we'll call it some different things, right? There are some dogs that like can maintain place or can maintain, a position, but they never really turn their brain off.
Right.
And so, and that's okay too, right? Like meet them where they are, work at their pace, do what they can handle. And so it's a long journey for some dogs. So.
And I think, so there's so many, we talk about relaxation protocol. I personally want my dogs to be like, oh, we're just hanging out. Oh, what are we doing? And then, but the motion of the body, where the body is like, I'm taking everything in, I'm calm, cool, and collected. And this is where I like what Suzanne talks about, is that relaxation protocol, like hanging and just being this and that. So I remember, so I worked on this I had a dog named Fender, and Fender was like super hyper. He's like, I'm on, I'm off, I'm on, I'm off, I'm on, I'm off. And so I did this with him, and I'm like, what is wrong with you? How come you cannot relax? And it drove me insane. And I remember the instructor, and it was a group called P-Vibe, Positive Vibe, who had done a bunch of Frisbee stuff. And they got a bunch of rescues, and they would train them and this and that. And they would teach them to go on a platform and, station. And so for Fender, because I was so like ridiculous with my energy, that kind of helped us kind of grow together as a team. And then finally he was like, oh, you just want me to hang out here? Yeah, that's what I want. And it helped me focus. It helped him focus. So like you have to consider your frame of mind when you're working these things, because it does impact how you engage your dog. So, and whereas with Ivy, I did this with her and she's like, yeah, I can chill. And I remember in my building, I put her up on rolled up mats, and I was like Walmart mom. I just walked away and I was like talking to somebody and everything. And she's in the other room just hanging out there. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she's not the most social. She's not super tolerant overall. And I'm like, oh, I had a Walmart mom moment. I have to go find my kid, so I go to look for her. And she's just like, yeah, I'm hanging. I'm like, and everyone's like, she just stood there the whole time. She hung out there and she was like looking, and we're like, okay, I don't get it. And I felt so bad, because for me, that relationship, I was like, I'm sorry, I suck, right? Because I shouldn't have done that to you. That was my error. And so I was like, I'm sorry, let's come with me. So you have to be really mindful about that piece, and not hang them out to dry like I did that time. That was not nice. So, but she'll still go and hang out and relax. And usually when you talk about the relaxation, what does the body look like? Is it in Sphinx position? Are they head up, ready to go? Are their eyes right there, focused on you and so forth? Should it be more of a, that's cool. Yeah, whatever. What are we doing again? Oh, yeah, okay. And think about the motion, right? So if the motion's fluid and calm and quiet, the mind is not so jazzed, that kind of stuff. And that's what I look for. And I think that for the relaxation protocol, that's ideally what we're looking for. And I think while mat training or platform training is good for specific dogs, I think it depends on who the dog is. If the dog is having attention issues or what have you, sometimes you can help that as a way of guiding their brain, and helping them understand that this is a focal point. But then your next step is, okay, that's a focal point, but then you need to teach them how to relax on it. And I think that's what's missing, because I remember saying, there was a gentleman who had a Malinois, and he was a Hobart police officer. And I was like so impressed with this Malinois. There was another officer with German Shepherd, and the German Shepherd's sitting there, and they do more sit stationing versus hang out, relax. This particular dog, I'm like, I want one of those. And he was this Malinois. He was like standing there. He's like falling asleep on his station. And I'm like, that dog's pretty chill. And then he took his head and relaxed on the back of the seat, and he's like, or the back of the chair, and put his head there, and he was closing his eyes and stuff. And I was like, that to me is pretty cool. Like, I want that. I want that where life happens and I can just chill. Now, he was super sharp as a police dog. And the other one was just hyper focused, hyper alert and stuff like that. Okay, what are we doing? What's happening? And I think it depends on the job at hand for the dog. But for me, as a more of a pet dog person, I want them chilled, so.
Yep. And, I always talk about him. I'm sorry. He's just such an interesting dog to me. Right. So I've been working on this since he was 6 months old.
Yeah.
And we would take our classes where that's all we do is we hung out in the back and we just worked on hanging out. And I'll tell you what, as soon as I assume the position, right? So I'll sit in a chair, I'll kind of lean forward a little bit, right? Put my hands on my knees. And he's like, oh, we're doing the down thing, right? And he will lay down and he's constantly, look at me.
Yep.
For an hour and a half. Like he cannot in those moments. And I've never tried the stationing. So quite honestly, maybe I should try it and see if it's something that might push us forward. Sure. But unless he's in his own home or his own crate, the dog does not relax. If he's up and there's any potential of doing something, he is, again, that hyper vigilant, like, what's happening? What are we doing? So it's a struggle. Those dogs suck. I mean,
they're hard. They're hard. Right. And I like the busy herding breeds and stuff like that, and the dogs who want to work and engage. But I find the hardest thing is for them to settle. I don't know if you've seen that. They're like, because I know it's genetic that's what they want. So when I look for selecting a dog, I really pay attention to arousal to see how functional that arousal is, right? And that's a critical thing for me. Like, I don't want something that's on all the time. Like right now, what I'm struggling is if my husband just takes the remote and puts it off to the side of the table, the dog's Pan, the little cattle dog you saw, she's like, we're going outside. And she goes running to the door. The whole house goes up in smokes. And I'm like, I hate you all. I hate all of you right now. So, okay, note to self, how do I need to change that? Right. So, and it's gotten better because the older ones are like, yeah, she's just a nut job. And they just look, pick up their head, and they're like, whatever. But then Pan's like, are we going outside? Yeah. And she's like, game on to go play ball or run out the door. And so I'm like, there's my patience. My patience aunt has to come on. And I'm like, how do I sort through this? How are we going to survive this piece? And so I think that's something that we all struggle with to some degree based upon the type of personalities we have in our home. So, but what are...
I was just going to say, let's watch a settle video so that we can actually show these guys kind of, which one do you want first, the pity or the...
So let's do the pity, because the pity is an interesting little girl. And she has a really hard time settling. And so Joanne will bring her up. So she's 6 months old. She was from a rescue. The rescue had, she was sitting in a shelter for, I don't know how long. So she came to us, or to me. And so myself and a couple of people were working with her. And she had a very challenging time to just be. And she's come, I think this week will be like her 4th and 5th time. But so we take a little bit of this. I take her on the back porch. It's harder for her around other dogs. She gets super excited. And that was interesting too. So for her, her body language is very forward, but very interested and engaging, aroused. And so I tried putting her with a couple of dogs. And what's interesting, my border collie was like, nope, I'm out. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And she was space taking and body slamming and all this stuff. And he would correct her and she didn't get it. So then what I did was I actually put her with a bunch of dogs. And then she's like, I don't know what to do with this. So this is a case of in some cases, you have to be really careful to know these dogs to figure out like, how do I place it with a dog? But here we're working on settle, because mom and dad tried to bring this dog out. And as we bring this dog out, you can play at any time.
Okay.
She would not pay attention. And you'll see a lot of this. She had a hard time. She was very auditory. She was very aware of her environment. People were not as important to her. Again, she grew up in a rescue. And so she had limited value about people other than you get a leash on, I have to listen, right? Which is typical.
Right. And
over arousal. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, look at the arousal level, the motion and the quality of movement. She's just bouncing all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And nothing productive.
And so what I did was, I'm like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. I stepped on the leash. So I did more parking behavior. Now, and everybody's different. So I said, hey, I'm not going to give you a spot because you aren't even going to pay attention. But my rate of reinforcement is pretty quick, right? So I'm like, cookies happen, but fluid. I'm not like throwing the cookies down. I'm continuing doing the same thing. Can you like, and I didn't tell her to down. I just wanted her to learn how to be, because being is important. And so my rate of reinforcement was frequent. And towards the end of this, we go along in this, you'll find that she's a good girl. She started to like, oh, this might mean something to me. I don't know. So rate of reinforcement is increased. She started looking up to me. And then I'm going to start to slow down my rate of reinforcement to see if she can sustain it and sustain more of a calmer mind, so to speak. It's getting better, right? Already. And then I can't do it. So I'm not going to remind her. I'm going to let her sort, because sometimes I think what happens is we get upset. Oh my gosh, you should be settling. You are doing it. And I don't take offense if my dog's like, I need a minute to process. You let them process. And then if they come back, you can have them work that again. So now I'm going to help her again into that position. And then I held the cookie. So the cookie was in my hand. I was like, hey, do you remember this thing? I lured her down into position, but I didn't release the cookie until she went into it. She's like, that's still too much. I need a minute. Okay, let's try that again. Right? Hold on. Sound. Right? She's like, something. And then she offered to sit. I need a minute. And I don't take any of this to offense. You have to be willing to work at the dog's pace. So I gave her some time to process. She's like, interesting. And I said, hey, can you come back here again? Can we do stuff? And then she rolled on the hip, right? And then notice it started to go back to a little more fluency, a fluid motion. Rate of reinforcement increased. Now I'm going to hold back a little bit as we get a little further on here. And then she's going to stop and look at the ground. She's like, the cookie should be here, right? That's a start. That's not my end. I want her to be like chilled, relaxed, just like my body stretched out. And then I was like, okay, you need a break. And so I released her. But if you take a look, I don't know, what was my length of time on that, Joanne? Maybe 3 minutes, not even, maybe 2.
3:29 it said,
Yeah.
But I think that was, the whole video. So
yeah. So yeah, I
minutes,
mean,
probably.
right. And so like when I work with dogs, I don't know about you, my sessions are not long. Like
Right.
3 minutes still is kind of long for me.
Right.
And I was trying to like help educate the owners to say, this is what we're looking for. So I was mic'd up and I was talking through to say, here's this, here's that, here's what we're looking at, so that they can train their eyes. Because, when you're in the thick of things, it's hard to see, right? It's hard to see the forest for the trees. So sometimes it helps with a second person kind of saying, this is why I'm doing this. This is what I'm looking at, etc. So she's a tricky girl. I'm not going to lie. I'm like, wow, and with dogs that are super active and seem very distractible, I think the general population is more into trying to manipulate the dog mentally and physically to get into, and talking to them, hey, 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 when all it does is it becomes more background noise and something else to try and process. And I think sometimes quiet is better.
Yeah, one of the things I think it's interesting, and I see it a lot in obedience, right? Which is they have a command for the like flip the hip,
Yeah,
right? Which is so interesting because like, yeah, I get it. If you can get a dog to sit or lie down, ideally you're helping, then that goes back to kind of the Caesar stuff too, right? Which is like, ugh. But anyway, right? If you can get the dog to be in the position, well, then the emotions will
mine will
follow.
fall. Yeah,
Okay, that there's a small bit of truth to that, right? Like if you're super stressed and you're pacing around the room and I'm like, "Hey, why don't you just sit down and talk to me for a minute?" And you might be able to and you might not, right? Like pacing might be something to help you process whatever's happening in your brain right now, and if I limit that, right, I'm also going to limit your ability to process. So be careful. I never teach those position switches, right? I work the down, but I will never like try and maneuver them to roll on a hip,
right,
because when they do it all on their own free will, that is 100% information on how they're feeling, right? And that may only last for 2 seconds, just like you saw in the pity, right? She's like, oh, nope, right? And she gets right back up. But right, if you were worried about a position, you may correct that or try and fix that. And like, don't. When they say they need a second, they really do. They're being very honest.
right. It's a mindset, right? What we're talking about, these types of things are a mindset of the dog's mindset, not necessarily. We have an idea of what we want, but
Mhm.
I can't convince any, for the love of God, cannot, as trainers, we do our darndest to try and help people get what they want, but we can't make them do it, right? And it's the frustrating part because we see a lot of potential in certain dogs, and it's like, but your dog says that they're not ready yet. So why don't you just let that be for now? Let that be your mark for now, and everything else will come. And I think that you're right. Like, I've seen a lot of people try to process and try to get the dog to do it. And I'm like, well, if the dog can do it and they're, tolerant enough and appropriate enough to be able to do that, that's great. But I didn't ask that pup to do anything. I was like, can you just hang out down here? And she needed time, and I let it happen, and then we repeated. And again, at home, her demeanor is much different because there's less distractibility, right?
Mhm.
And she was at my house, there were tons of dogs around her, and she had to learn to do that. So the distraction level was high there for her. So
Yeah, and it's like for all you sporting people or even just pet people, right? When you look across the aisle and you're like, "Oh, look at that. That's so amazing. That's what I'm going to strive for. I wish my dog could do that." Sometimes it has nothing to do with the trainer. Sometimes it has to do with the dog that you're dealt, right?
yep,
If you can find the dog that's like that pity that somebody is doing successful things with, wow, I want to talk to that
yep,
owner, that trainer,
yep,
right? Because that is a super successful person. Not that other people aren't successful, but right. And I always joke sometimes training dogs like that. It's like, oh my God, you need to go have a beer afterwards because you just need to like settle down because they
I
take
know.
so much out of you, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Because
she
it's
does. And she's wicked smart. It has
yeah,
nothing to do with that, but it's just so much going on in her mind. She's like running. It's like running through the trees and stuff. And I'm like, oh wow, it is so challenging. And for me, I'm like, patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue. And I'm
yep,
like, and I know you see that potential there because you see glimmers of this and that. And I know she has great potential to get into a better frame of mind. I guess from my point, and I'm sure you feel the same, it's like how difficult of a life that must be to constantly be in that state,
yes,
right? And to
yep,
me, I want to affect that piece because that is more important to me than can you sit stay, can you walk nicely on a leash. I want to affect the quality of life over the behaviors of can you settle in the presence of 1,000 dogs walking around you. It's like I can't do that, because I'd be constantly, I mean, I'm terrible when I go to like any events where there's tons of dogs. I'm like, oh my gosh, did you see that? There's going to be a fight. I can't do this. And I am like, my anxiety rises in that situation and I have a hard time settling. So I can't expect that out of an animal, but the state of mind, that panic or that concern is really critical to me. And I want to affect that over anything else.
everybody needs a Xanax and their Cheerios. So But yeah, and I'm with you. It's because if you really step back and think about what that would be like to be in that head,
Yeah.
I don't want to be there. Like that's not a
No.
place for me. I'm a very calm, chill person. Like when I get mad, it's like, bloop, okay, I'm fine now. Like,
Yeah.
and I know the two of you, Nancy's not on, but I know you as well, right? It's you don't blip. You kind of
Oh,
takes
I
you a minute.
spike. I'm a
Yeah,
spiker. I spike
and it's
and then I
fine,
come
right?
down and I'm like,
And we're all different, right? Some people are like, why aren't you getting madder about that? I'm like, yeah, because there's nothing I could do with the outcome of it anyway, right? It'll all be fine in the end. You're like, I don't understand that. But so dogs are the same way. So just as certain people where you're like, I don't understand that, doesn't mean right that it's not true. It's not who that dog is, who that person is. So are these hypervigilant dogs labeled high anxiety sometimes? Sometimes. So, I think we were talking about my Doberman. He's absolutely not high anxiety. He's not anxious about anything. He is just always on. Always. It's unless he's home, right? If he's home in his own environment with no distractions, or he's in a crate somewhere, he can rest just fine. But when he's out and a leash is on, right? The pitty's the same way, right?
right. Yeah. And consider what they're designed to do genetically, right? Like the Doberman, they're more of guard dogs, so they have to be a little more vigilant. So does that mean that maybe mom or dad or somebody down the road, like, down their lineage was a little more vigilant and that came through on him? Sure. That's a possibility. Who knows for sure? I don't, but I know that Joanne has done everything she can to try and circumvent some of that, or try to, work against some of that. But sometimes they are who they are. And in this particular case with the pitty, for example, I don't know if I would consider it high anxiety as just hyper aware. Like, what's that? What's that? What's that? And the inability to completely process and then the resilience part of it, come back down from it. Right. And I think that also that resilience is something, I don't know about you, but I look for when picking dogs, right? Because I want quicker bounce back. I want my dogs to be able to come back off of it and be like, okay, that was interesting, but what are we doing? So I think there's some genetic components to it. And then of course, not just maybe in her case and not in Joanne's case, but in the pitty's case, a learning what was her history, because that will play into it. And then if the brain was always experiencing that all the time, it's wired that way. So now you have to go back and change that neural pathway, which is more challenging, right? So, I mean, I think sometimes people do, you can misdiagnose the hypervigilance for high anxiety. And I guess, how do you know the difference would be the motion, like how fluid the motion is, their recovery, that type of thing. So there would be a couple of things I would consider with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question, actually.
Yep. Yeah.
So you want to get into the coming one called? Or?
Sure. Okay, you have two. You want to do the first one? We'll do the first one. We'll see what that one is.
Let's see what it is. Let's go.
Oh, this is like a phone. It's a little white dog. Okay, hang on.
Okay.
It's a short. Okay.
I don't like those. Ugh. That's not what I wanted.
Okay. Well, it might not be very big. So you guys let us know if you can't see it. Okay. Cause it's I can only make it as big as I can.
Oh, so this is a little guy that he's 14 months old. There was recall issues, and he's a little interesting with other dogs. Like he runs up on them and gets in their face and might make little vocalizations. So we were working on recall because he would get out and stuff like that and get distracted. And so we were working on coming out of play. So the other dog's playing. He's like, that's interesting. Then I'd call him back to me, and he would come close enough to me where I can touch him. And I think that's interesting. I don't know about you, but I've never really had like, oh my gosh, I remember my Pomeranian Zach. Oh, it took everything in me to not kill him for not coming when called. I remember. So one time he went running And he was running in the field and he turned around and looked at me and he's like, had his little paw up and he's like wagging his body and his tongue was out. He's like, how about this? And I'm like, I really hate you right now. Come. And he's like, nope, I run further away. So it was, that was very challenging. And I was not good at training that. But now I've learned quite a bit about teaching to come close enough where I can actually grab a collar. And then, oh, here's the other one. So this is with a collar grab. I have a long line on him. And so I wanted him to be out in a field and so forth. And mind you, this particular dog, he liked food. So food was amazing for him. So we worked on, I gave him cookies, first intentionally focused. Do you care that I exist? Thank you to my husband for that loud noise. And then I started moving away, right? Do you care that I exist? We get cookies. And then I had a handout for a collar grab. And as I grab his collar, my cookie hand is off my leg and I'm reinforcing him. So then I'm going to call him. There's a hand. The hand is empty and the hand off my body has treats in it. So I want you to come close enough that I can grab your collar if need be, right? I want that to be, woohoo. I want that to be, you running and throwing yourself into my hand and then treats happen. So I'm kind of describing how to do this at home. So I toss a cookie, I let him find the cookie, I call him to me, and there we go.
You can see the hesitation on the collar grab there though, right? I'll
Yep.
play it again really quick just so you guys can see it. He's like, whoa, wait.
Is there yeah. And
okay.
then okay. Yep. And so this is rehearsal. This particular dog would not, he wouldn't come. He's like, catch me if you can. So I recommended him dragging a line in the house because even in my house, like when he was with me, I ended up trying to get him to come to me. He's like, I can't, I got to get all the crumbs. But it got better, right? He started to go, oh, and he looked at that hand. He's like, is there something there? And I think a lot of times we use a little bribery for them to come into us. Well, that hand extended, it has cookies in it. I'm not a big fan of doing that. I really want them to learn how to come close enough to me where you're doing of your own volition and then the treat occurs. That was much better. But, really smart, great dog.
Yeah, I think it's important though, and I'm just gonna, where were we? Over here. I'm just gonna go back to this because I want you to see it when she comes over, right? This moment when they first start to show this, and I'll tell you, this dog's been grabbed just because I know that, right? Where he's like, oh, I don't know. And what do? We grab them because they're close enough to grab, right? Don't do it. Okay? Don't reach out and grab, unless you're in a dangerous situation, then do what you got to do to keep your dog safe. But practice this without the grabbing that make them drive to you. Okay. Because if you start grabbing, I always say, I promise you, you'll get the best Muhammad Ali, like duck, bob and weave that you can ever get. They are so fast and smart as soon as they realize what's about to happen.
Yeah. And then you can start adding, right? So once he understands I touch you and good stuff happens, then my next step is I'm going to pet you and are you okay with this, right? So I'll start doing a little more handling as he's closer and then reinforce some of that as well. But yeah, this guy was a pretty smart guy. You could tell he had some concerns with I'm going to catch me if you can type of stuff, which is not my favorite game to play. So, end scene.
All right. So I don't think we can talk enough about recalls. I really don't. No. It's just, we just do it wrong a lot of the time. Right. And so, I mean, I'll even share a story with the foster dog, right? He would just come tearing in the house when I called him, when even brought him home. So whatever the family had him did a really good job with that piece of it. But you know what? I don't know if there's a critter. Actually, I do know there's a critter in my yard because my dog got I can't even find my words. What plays dead? It's not a skunk.
Possum. Possum.
Thank you. I was
Yep.
like, it's not a skunk. I keep wanting to say skunk. Anyway, he got a possum, and there's this groundhog that keeps coming in and eating berries, and then he runs out of my yard. And so the dogs are always sniffing where divot in the fence where the thing's coming in. And so he's been out there like, I hear you, but I gotta make sure, right? And so I have started now, I have to. I go out and get him. And I was out there with a flashlight, right? Waiting to go to bed. And I'm like, get in the house, right? But I don't stand at the door and call. I don't grab the treat jar and shake cookies.
Right.
And because he knows what it means. Right. So if I'm dealing with a brand new dog, yeah, I might break that stuff out if I have to. But if I call you and you know what it means and you are choosing not to come, I'm going to get you. Right. I'm not going to just keep calling or shut the door or any of that stuff. Right. When I know you know absolutely what I'm asking you to do, get in the house.
Right. Well, I think too, like one of the things I do to guard against it is I went to like Home Depot and they have like the spool of like paracord that you can purchase like $2 or $3 for this huge whatever. And then I get the little clip and stuff and I attach it and whatever. And that's my outside cord. So like if I have a dog who has recall issues and I've been working it, I manage it. So it's train versus manage, right? Because recall is so important. Like bad stuff can happen, right? And things can go awry, dogs can die. And so and even though my yard is like, I have fencing around it and stuff, I still don't want you to think that you can, because I want you to understand that that's a super important thing. So I remember Pan, for example, and Ivy, around 8 months old, they go out there, they're like, I'm potting. I'm like, hey, Ivy, come. Ivy turns and looks at me and she's like, pfft. And then she keeps going on. And I'm like, I about lost my mind. I was like, oh, wait a minute. What? What did you just do? And I was like, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Ivy, come. And she's like, busy. And I was like, oh, no, you didn't. I'm coming after you. So I went out there and then she's like, you don't look happy. I'm like, get in the house. And then she's like, okay. So then note to self, the next time you go outside, I put a leash on you. And the long line is like long. So like I'm not going to get upset because, that's not great either, but I'm going to help you come inside. I'm like, it's going to happen and you're not going to run away from me. So I think that's one of the other ways that I do. And Deb had said, if you have to go out to get your dog, does he fight you coming in? How do you keep that from turning into a catch me game? And that's what I would do, right? Have a plan B, which would be a leash on them, so that way, and a long line, long enough, because there's some dogs, I've seen some dogs are like, it's 8 feet long and or 6 feet long and you're 8 feet away. Therefore you can't catch me. So you have to have a long enough line to actually be able to like, no, it's going to happen. We're done.
Yeah. But no, Deb. So here's the deal. This guy, I don't think had any choice in anything that he did in his old home. Right. So I think he's not used to having freedom to make choices. And he's 17 months old. So, he's still kind of in the throes of adolescence and with a newfound sort of freedom to like, can't I, right? And so, no, he does not fight me because he knows what come means, right? And so when I come out, you could just see him because I'm like, come, Roscoe, come. And he's like, nope, doing something, right? He clearly is like, oh, I heard you, but no. So, and then when I come out, he's like, okay. Like, and then he runs up on the porch. He's like, sorry, so it's like, no, it's not a fight. But again, I think the stuff where you get into the catch me games and the fighting, it's, they are absolutely testing the waters. And that is truly, if he ran from me, I would 100% put a line on him. 100%. Right. Cause we're not starting that.
Right.
It's not an option for you to run from me. Right. No, so
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like the lines too, for sure. So
I don't know. I think, and that's about what we got, right? I mean, I think those are the most important things. I mean, and I think above all else, everything that we're talking about is we give the dogs an opportunity to make a choice, right? And that's not the world we live in. That's not the general ideation or the general make them do it. You know, I mean, I hear a lot of that. You can't let them get away with that. It's not about that. It's about teaching them what's more appropriate, what's more acceptable, right? So, and then giving them the opportunity to say, okay, I've taught you this skill. I've worked with this skill. Can you make a good choice?
Yep.
And I think that's sorely missing. So like, you know, I'm big on autonomy. I mean, like there's certain things that I'm like, no, you can't do that. But I also am clear about what the rules are, as you are, I know. And it's like, well, there is a consequence to behavior, but that consequence is relative to the individual dog in terms of what the amount of quote unquote pressure that you would apply to that individual dog. So whereas like maybe like I have a dog who I go, and she's like, oh, you killed me. Right. And I have another dog I do that with, and he's like, good, you're breathing. I'm going to go over here. Right. And so,
Yep.
and those dogs are fun. Right. But it just totally depends like who the individual is and applying the amount of, or the training that you need, and then starting to trust your training in safe situations where you think, you know, that nothing bad could happen. So like in the yard, I know that if the dog runs away from me, like they're not running into a street or somewhere terrible. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I do think that's really important to know who you have as a dog, right? Because I'm with Lisa. I have two that are like, oh, she took a deep breath, right? And you know, and I have one who's like, you can kick him in the head. I mean, yeah, he'll get upset about it. He's like, oh, you're mad? Like, I wouldn't kick him in the head. I don't advocate that. But right. But then and so one of the more interesting ones too is this guy who's very hungry underneath me. They ate early this morning, but is the foster dog Roscoe, right? He's got a lot of issues. You know, he's a little anxious. He's a little nervous about people. He's a little this, he's a little that. Overall, great dog, super smart. But you know what? He's a butthead. So when you start to put human stuff onto that, where you're like, he's had a hard life, and he, you know what? He's a tough cookie.
Oh, yeah.
He's a dog. Like, hey, stop that, right? And he needs a little harsher, not harsher, but he needs a little more of a correction, right? Than just a simple, like, you stop that now. Where the other dogs are like, oh, you know, And so just because you're anxious about certain things, or just because of this and that, I'm still going to meet you where you are. You know what I mean? When there's a true understanding of something and you're blowing me off, right? I'm gonna tell you that's not the right answer. So, Mary, no, we did not do Leave It tonight. We were just doing attention settles and recalls. So we can certainly put that on the list for another Facebook Live.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope we answered all your dying questions. There wasn't too many tonight, so thank you for those of you who did ask a couple. But have a lovely week, and I think we'll be back next week.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good week.